The night air tasted of iron and impending death. In the heart of the ancient city of Valdenmere, where cobblestone streets twisted like the arteries of some slumbering beast, the execution courtyard stood as a monument to human judgment and fear. Torches mounted on blackened iron brackets cast writhing shadows across the stone walls, their flames dancing nervously in the cold wind that swept down from the mountains. Above, the moon hung swollen and red, a blood moon, the peasants called it, as if the heavens themselves had come to witness what would transpire in that forsaken place. The courtyard was circular, designed centuries ago by architects who understood the theater of death. Tiered stone benches rose in concentric rings, allowing the nobility and common folk alike to observe executions from varying distances according to their station. Tonight those benches were packed. Nobles in their fur-trimmed cloaks and jeweled collars occupied the lower tiers, their faces masks of practiced indifference that barely concealed their morbid curiosity. Higher up, the common people pressed together, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, their eyes wide with a peculiar mixture of horror and fascination that only public executions could inspire. At the center of this amphitheater of death stood the platform. Constructed from oak that had been stained almost black by decades of blood, it rose 6 feet above the courtyard floor. The wood groaned under its own weight, each plank bearing the scars of countless executions, axe marks, deep grooves where blades had bitten too deeply, and stains that no amount of scrubbing could ever remove. The execution block itself sat at the platform's center, a massive piece of ironwood worn smooth by the necks of the condemned. Beside it, the headsman's axe waited, its blade catching the torchlight and throwing it back in cruel crimson flashes. But it was the man kneeling in chains before the platform who commanded the attention of every soul present. His name was Damien Cross, though few in the crowd remembered it. To them he was simply the traitor, the heretic, the one who loved a monster. He knelt in the dirt with his hands shackled behind his back, iron manacles connected by chains so heavy they had worn the skin of his wrists raw and bleeding. His clothes, once the fine garments of a merchant lord's son, hung in tatters, torn and filthy from weeks in the dungeon beneath the citadel. His dark hair, matted with sweat and blood, fell across a face that should have been handsome but was now a canvas of suffering. Bruises blossomed purple and yellow across his jaw and cheekbones, a cut above his right eye had scabbed over, and his lower lip was split and swollen. Yet despite the evident torture his body had endured, Damien's eyes held no fear. They were dark eyes, nearly black in the torchlight, and they stared not at the execution block or the gathered crowd, but at the empty air before him, as if seeing through the veil of the present moment into some other reality known only to him. Those eyes were filled with something the crowd found far more disturbing than terror would have been. They were filled with love, profound and unshakable, the kind of love that ballads were written about and kingdoms fell because of. Lord Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood stood to the right of the platform, resplendent in his black robes embroidered with silver thread that depicted the scales of justice. He was a tall man, gaunt as a scarecrow, with a face like weathered parchment and eyes that held all the warmth of winter stones. In his hand, he held the writ of execution, signed and sealed by the king himself. He had been waiting for this moment for 3 months, ever since Damien Cross had been dragged in chains from the ruins of the Thornwood estate and charged with crimes against humanity, against God and against nature itself. Damien Alexander Cross. Blackwood's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife through silk. You have been found guilty of consorting with the unholy, of trafficking with creatures of darkness, and of betraying your own kind for the embrace of a demon in woman's form. You have confessed to these crimes before the king's tribunal. Have you any final words before the sentence of death is carried out? The crowd leaned forward as one eager for the condemned man's last statement. Would he beg for mercy? Would he curse his captors? Would he finally, at the edge of the abyss, renounce the monster he claimed to love? Damien's voice, when it came, was hoarse from disuse and dehydration, but steady. I ask only one thing, Lord Magistrate. Not mercy. Not reprieve. Just, let me see her one last time. Let me see my wife. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The nobles on the lower benches shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. The common folk whispered urgently to one another, the sound building like distant thunder. Your wife, Blackwood's voice dripped with contempt, is an abomination. A vampire. A creature that feeds on human blood and walks in mockery of God's creation. She is no wife, she is a curse, a pestilence, and the very reason you kneel here now awaiting judgment. She is my wife, Damien repeated, and despite his chains, despite the blood and bruises, despite the axe that waited for his neck, his voice rang with absolute conviction. We were married under the old laws in the presence of witnesses. We exchanged vows that bound us in this life and whatever lies beyond. I love her. And if I am to die tonight, I ask only to see her face one last time. Blackwood's lip curled in disgust. The creature you speak of is a monster responsible for the deaths of dozens of good Christian souls. She is a plague upon this land, and by consorting with her, you became complicit in her evil. Your request is denied. The execution will proceed immediately. But as the Lord Magistrate raised his hand to signal the headsman, a voice rang out from the crowd, a young priest who had been observing from the third tier. Lord Magistrate, by the old laws he invokes, even the condemned have the right to a final request if it poses no threat to the proceedings. To deny him would be to break the very laws we claim to uphold. Blackwood turned, his face flushing with anger, but he could see other heads nodding, including some of the nobles. The old laws were sacred, woven into the fabric of Waldenmeer's founding, and to break them openly would undermine his authority. He ground his teeth, then spoke with barely controlled fury. Very well. Send word to the creature. Tell her that her husband wishes to see her before his death. If she dares show her unholy face in this court of justice, she may do so. But tell her also that she comes under terms of truce, and that any violation will result in her immediate destruction, and the deaths of any who aid her. Messengers were dispatched immediately, riders on fast horses carrying the word through the city gates and out into the dark countryside beyond, where the vampire territories began. No one truly believed she would come. Vampires did not venture into the heart of human cities, especially not when that city was armed and waiting. It would be suicide. The messengers would return with word that she had refused, or more likely, they would not return at all. But Blackwood had underestimated one crucial element, the depth of love between Damien Cross and the vampire queen he had married. The execution was delayed. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour, then half an hour. The crowd grew restless, the cold seeping through their clothes and into their bones. Some began to leave, convinced this was a fool's errand and the execution would simply proceed without the monster's presence. The nobles shifted in their seats, their comfort giving way to irritation. Damien remained kneeling, his eyes closed now, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been a conversation with someone only he could hear. The chains rattled softly with each breath he took. Then, precisely 47 minutes after the messengers had departed, the temperature in the courtyard dropped precipitously. Breath that had been misting in the cold air now came out in thick clouds of vapor. The torches flickered wildly, their flames bending nearly horizontal as if pushed by an invisible wind. A sound filled the air, not quite thunder, not quite a bell tolling, but something between the two, resonant and deep enough to be felt in the chest cavity rather than merely heard. The shadows at the far end of the courtyard began to move. They should not have been able to move. Shadows were merely the absence of light, after all, fixed to the objects that cast them. But these shadows writhed and coalesced, pulling free from the walls and the ground, gathering into a mass of darkness that was deeper and more absolute than the night around it. From within that darkness, 2 points of crimson light appeared, burning like coals in a furnace. Then she stepped through. Lady Seraphina Nocturne, vampire queen of the Northern Territories, daughter of the First Blood, walked from shadow into torchlight, and every soul in that courtyard felt the weight of her presence like a physical force. She was breathtaking in the most literal sense. People forgot to breathe as they stared at her, their lungs seizing with a mixture of terror and awe that transcended rational thought. Her beauty was not the soft, gentle beauty praised by poets and painters. It was the terrible beauty of a winter storm, of a forest fire at midnight, of a falling star moments before it strikes the earth. It was beauty that cut like a knife and left one bleeding with wonder. Her skin was pale as porcelain, so white it seemed to glow with its own inner luminescence, unmarred by any blemish or imperfection. It was the pallor of the undead, yes, but it was also flawless, eternal, untouched by time or disease or decay. In the torchlight, her skin seemed to shift between alabaster and the faintest hint of silver, as if moonlight had been compressed into flesh. Her face was a masterwork of angular perfection, high cheekbones that could have been carved from marble, a jaw that tapered to an elegant point, lips full and red as fresh blood, and a nose that would have made Grecian sculptors weep with envy. But it was her eyes that truly captured and held the gaze of all who looked upon her. They glowed with their own crimson light, not merely reflecting the torches but radiating power and ancient knowledge. Those eyes had seen empires rise and fall, had witnessed centuries pass like seasons, and they held depths that human minds were not equipped to fully comprehend. Her hair cascaded down her back and over her shoulders in waves that shifted between deepest black and shimmering silver, depending on how the light caught it. It moved with a life of its own, stirring in a wind that touched nothing else, each strand seeming to be spun from shadow and starlight woven together. She wore a gown that was itself a work of art, blood-red silk that clung to every curve of her body before flowing out into a train that seemed to merge with the shadows at her feet. The bodice was embroidered with patterns that hurt to look at directly, ancient vampiric sigils that predated human civilization and whispered of powers best left forgotten. The gown was cut to display her figure without shame or modesty, the generous curve of her breasts, the narrow taper of her waist, the flare of her hips. She was a creature of the night, and she wore her supernatural allure like a weapon. But it was the wings that truly marked her as something beyond mortal ken. They emerged from her shoulder blades, great sweeping appendages that seemed constructed from shadow and bone, membrane and midnight. They were massive, easily spanning 20 feet when fully extended, and they moved with fluid grace, folding and unfurling slightly as she walked, displacing the air around her with each subtle movement. The membrane between the bone struts was translucent, revealing glimpses of the darkness beyond, but also displaying patterns that resembled constellations in an alien sky. As Seraphina moved forward, the shadows moved with her, pooling at her feet and spreading outward like an oil slick. Where they touched the torchlight, the flames dimmed and guttered. The very stones of the courtyard seemed to groan beneath her presence, as if the earth itself recognized something that should not walk upon its surface in defiance of natural law. The vampire guards materialized from the shadows behind her, 6 of her personal guard, ancient and powerful in their own right, but they might as well have been children standing in the presence of their mother. They wore armor that appeared to be forged from night itself, holding weapons that drank in the light rather than reflecting it. Their eyes glowed with the same crimson light as their queen's, but dimmer, lesser, satellites orbiting a dark sun. The human guards surrounding the courtyard raised their crossbows, the heavy weapons loaded with bolts of ash wood tipped with silver and blessed by priests. Their hands trembled as they aimed at the approaching vampire queen, knowing full well that their weapons would be useless if she decided to strike. A single vampire of her power could slaughter everyone in the courtyard before the first bolt could be loosed. But Seraphina paid them no mind. Her eyes, those burning crimson orbs, were fixed solely on the man kneeling in chains at the center of the courtyard. Damien, her voice was like silk drawn across steel, beautiful and deadly, carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. It was a voice that could command armies or whisper lovers' promises, and it held within it the accumulated authority of centuries. Damien opened his eyes, and when he saw her, his entire face transformed. The pain, the exhaustion, the suffering, all of it fell away like a discarded cloak. What remained was pure, undiluted joy, the expression of a man who has found water after dying of thirst, of a lost soul who has finally come home. Seraphina? He breathed her name like a prayer. She moved toward him with inhuman speed, crossing the distance in the space between heartbeats, but the guards, both human and vampire, tensed. Lord Blackwood raised his hand sharply. "Hold, creature," his voice cracked like a whip. "You come under terms of truce. You will not approach the condemned within 10 paces. You may speak your farewells from where you stand, and then you will depart. These are the terms. Violate them and face destruction." Seraphina stopped, and for a moment the temperature in the courtyard dropped even further. Frost began to form on the stone, crystallizing in fractal patterns. The shadows around her feet roiled and churned like a stormy sea. Her eyes fixed on Blackwood with such intensity that the Lord Magistrate actually took a step back despite himself. When she spoke, her voice was cold enough to freeze marrow. "You dare dictate terms to me, human? I who walked this earth when your ancestors were huddling in caves and worshipping fire? I who commanded legions before your pathetic kingdom was even a dream in some warlord's fever-addled mind." "I dare," Blackwood replied, though his voice wavered, "because you are one and we are many. Because the sun will rise in 3 hours and you will burn while we remain. Because for all your power and ancient evil, you are standing in the heart of human civilization, surrounded by weapons designed specifically to end your unholy existence. So yes, vampire, I dare. You will keep your distance, or you will die here along with your husband." The word husband dripped with mockery and contempt. For a long moment, the courtyard balanced on a knife's edge. The tension was so thick it could be tasted, metallic and sharp like blood on the tongue. Seraphina's wings spread slightly, casting shadows that reached across the courtyard like grasping fingers. Her guards shifted into combat stances, ready to protect their queen or die trying. The human guards tightened their grips on their crossbows, fingers trembling on triggers. Then Damien's voice cut through the tension, weak but clear. "Sarah, please. It's all right. I can see you. I can hear you. That's all I asked for. That's enough." Seraphina's head snapped back toward him, and the fury in her eyes transformed into something far more dangerous: anguish. When she spoke again, all the ancient power and cold authority was gone, replaced by the voice of a woman whose heart was breaking. "Enough? How can this be enough? They're going to kill you, Damien. They're going to take you from me. After everything we've been through, after everything we've sacrificed, they're going to end you with an axe and call it justice." "I know," Damien said softly. "I've known since the moment they captured me. I've had 3 months to accept it, Sarah. 3 months in a cell to make peace with my death. Then why?" Her voice rose, carrying across the courtyard like a lament. "Why did you ask to see me? Why make me watch this? Why force me to stand here, helpless, while they murder the only man I have ever loved?" Tears streaked down her perfect pale cheeks, not the clear tears humans shed, but tears of blood, crimson tracks that stained her skin like war paint. Vampires could not cry water. They could only cry what they consumed, and what they consumed was blood. Her tears fell to the stone and steamed where they landed, tiny pools of red that glowed faintly with their own inner light. Damien struggled against his chains, trying to move closer to her, but the iron held firm. His voice was urgent now, desperate to make her understand. "Because I needed you to know, Sarah. I needed you to see that I'm not afraid. I needed you to understand that every moment we had together was worth this. Worth all of this. The torture, the trial, the execution. I'd endure it all again for just one more night in your arms. Damien, please." "I love you," he said, and his voice rang clear and strong despite his broken body. "I love you with everything I am. You showed me what it means to truly live, to feel every moment with intensity beyond what mere mortality allows. You gave me more life in our 5 years together than I could have found in 100 years of conventional existence. I'm not a victim, Sarah. I'm not a man under a curse. I am the luckiest man who ever lived, because I got to love you and be loved by you in return." The crowd was utterly silent now, transfixed by the exchange between the condemned man and the vampire queen. Even the nobles who had come expecting to see a groveling heretic had fallen quiet, their certainty shaken by the raw emotion on display before them. Lord Blackwood, however, was unmoved. "How touching," his voice was acid. "The lamb professes love for the wolf as it tears out his throat. This is not love, Cross. This is enchantment, dark magic, the unholy influence of a creature that has no capacity for true human emotion. You have been corrupted, and that corruption ends tonight." "You understand nothing," Seraphina spoke without taking her eyes off Damien. "You see monsters where there are only beings different from yourself. You call it justice to murder a man for the crime of loving someone you don't understand. You condemn what you fear and fear what you cannot control. We fear what threatens us. A new voice entered the conversation. It belonged to Cardinal Matthias, who had been sitting silent among the nobles but now rose to his feet. He was an old man, white-haired and stooped, but his voice carried authority born of decades of religious service. We fear creatures that feed on human blood, that kill without remorse, that cannot walk in God's sunlight because they are abominations against His creation. We fear vampires because vampires have given us every reason to fear them. We were at war. Serafina turned to face the cardinal, and her wings spread fully now, vast and terrible. Humans and vampires fought for territory and resources for 1,000 years. Both sides committed atrocities. Both sides spilled oceans of blood. But Damien and I proved that another way was possible. We showed that human and vampire could love each other, could build something beautiful together, could bridge the divide between our species. You showed that humans could be seduced and corrupted by monsters, Blackwood countered. You showed that our young men could be lured into damnation by pretty faces and honeyed words. You showed that the vampire threat extends beyond mere physical danger into the very corruption of human souls. I showed that love transcends the boundaries you draw. Serafina's voice rose to a roar that echoed off the stone walls. I showed that the hate you preach is not inevitable, that the war you wage is not necessary, that we could find peace if only you would allow it. Peace with monsters is collaboration with evil, Cardinal Matthias intoned. There can be no peace between light and darkness, between the living and the undead, between God's children and Satan's spawn. The young man kneeling there made his choice, and now he must face the consequences. As must you, creature, when the sun rises and you must flee back to whatever dark hole you crawled from. Serafina looked as if she might launch herself at the cardinal despite the weapons trained on her, despite the certainty of destruction. Her hands clenched into fists, her fangs extended fully, and the shadows around her feet began to rise like a tidal wave of darkness. But then Damien spoke again, his voice cutting through her rage. "Sarah, look at me. Please look at me." She turned back to him, and the fury drained from her face, replaced by devastation. "I need you to promise me something," Damien said quietly. "When this is over, when I'm gone, I need you to keep trying. Keep building bridges. Keep showing them that vampires and humans can coexist. Don't let my death be the end of what we started. Make it the beginning. Make it mean something." "How can you ask that of me?" Serafina's voice broke. "How can you expect me to forgive them, to work with them, to make peace with the very people who are murdering you? Because someone has to break the cycle," Damien said. "Someone has to choose forgiveness over vengeance, peace over war, love over hate. We tried to be those people together. Now you'll have to carry that torch alone. I know you're strong enough. I've always known." "I don't want to be strong enough," she whispered. "I just want you to live. There has to be a way. I could turn you. Right now. I could change you into one of us and they couldn't kill you. You'd be immortal. We'd be together forever, just like we always planned." A murmur ran through the crowd at this suggestion. The guards tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. Lord Blackwood stepped forward. "If you attempt such abomination, vampire, we will fill you both with silver and ash before the transformation could possibly complete. You would die together, yes, but you would both die. Is that what you want?" Serafina ignored him, her eyes pleading with Damien. "It could work. It's possible. I'm fast enough, strong enough. I could turn you before they could stop me." But Damien was shaking his head. "No, Sarah. That's not the answer. That's not what I want." "What you want?" Her voice rose to nearly a shriek. "You want to die? You want to leave me? You want to throw away everything we could have together?" "I want to die human," Damien said firmly. "I want to die as myself, as the man who loved you, not as something else. I want my death to mean something to these people. If I became a vampire to escape execution, it would only prove their point. It would confirm all their fears about corruption and damnation. But if I die human, if I face my end with courage and dignity and unshakable love for you, maybe, just maybe, some of them will see what we had for what it truly was. Not corruption. Love." "I don't care what they think," Seraphina was openly weeping blood now, the crimson tears flowing freely down her face and dripping from her chin. I only care about you. I only care about us. I know. Damien's own eyes were wet with tears now, ordinary human tears that mixed with the blood from his injuries. But I care about what we built together, about the dream we shared. I care about the world we wanted to create, where human children and vampire children could play together without fear, where love like ours wouldn't be a crime. That world won't come if we fight fire with fire. It will only come through sacrifice and faith and stubborn, relentless hope. Lord Blackwood had heard enough. He raised his hand again, signaling the headsman who stood ready on the platform. Your time is concluded. The condemned has seen his wife. Farewell has been said. The sentence will now be carried out. Guards, if the vampire makes any move toward the prisoner, kill them both. The headsman stepped forward, a mountain of a man wearing a black hood that covered his face. He lifted the massive axe with ease, testing its weight, ensuring the blade was properly balanced. The crowd leaned forward. This was the moment they had come for, the moment when judgment would be executed and the natural order would be restored. But Seraphina was not finished. She drew herself up to her full height, her wings spreading wide enough to cast the entire platform in shadow. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries, the authority of ancient blood, and the power of a love that had transcended death itself. Damien Cross is my husband under the old laws, she declared. We were married in the ruins of Shadow Keep, witnessed by both human and vampire, bound by oaths that predate your church and your kingdom. By those same old laws, the laws that founded this city and every settlement in this land, I claim the right of substitution. A shocked silence fell over the courtyard. Even Lord Blackwood looked taken aback. The right of substitution was ancient indeed, a law so old that few even remembered it existed. But those who studied legal history knew of it, a law that allowed a blood relative or legally bound spouse to take the place of the condemned, accepting their punishment in their stead. You cannot be serious, Cardinal Matthias said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. I am entirely serious, Seraphina replied. By the right of substitution, I claim my husband's punishment as my own. I will take his place on that block. I will accept his sentence. And you will let him go free. The courtyard erupted. Nobles shouted in confusion and argument. Commoners surged to their feet, trying to see better, trying to understand what was happening. The guards looked to Blackwood for instruction, but the Lord Magistrate stood frozen, his mind racing through legal precedents and historical records. No. Damien's voice cut through the chaos. Sarah, no. I won't let you. You don't have a choice, my love, Seraphina said gently. The right has been invoked. If they deny it, they break the old laws themselves and every legal proceeding in this city becomes null and void. They cannot refuse. They must accept my substitution or admit that their own laws are meaningless. But the sun, Damien was struggling frantically against his chains now, heedless of how the iron cut into his wrists. Sarah, the sun rises in less than 3 hours. If you're trapped here on that platform when dawn comes, then I will burn, she said simply. I will burn and you will live. That is an acceptable trade. Not to me. Damien screamed, and there was such anguish in his voice that even some of the hardest hearts in the crowd felt it like a knife. Sarah, please. I can't lose you. I won't survive it. You will survive, Seraphina said, and her voice was tender now, soft as a mother comforting a child. You will survive because you are strong, because you are good, because you have work left to do in this world. You will survive because our love doesn't end with death, mine or yours. It transcends flesh and blood and breath. It is eternal, Damien. Nothing they do here tonight can change that. Lord Blackwood had recovered his composure. He conferred quickly with Cardinal Matthias and several of the nobles, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Finally, he straightened and addressed the court. The right of substitution is indeed part of the old laws, he admitted, and a ripple of astonishment ran through the crowd. However, there are conditions. The substitute must be of sound mind and must make the offer willingly, without coercion or enchantment. They must understand fully what they are accepting. He turned his cold gaze on Serafina. You understand that if we accept your substitution, you will be chained to that platform with silver and ashwood bonds. You will not be able to escape. When the sun rises, you will burn. It is not a clean death, vampire. You will suffer agony beyond measure as the daylight consumes you. Do you truly accept this fate? I do, Serafina said without hesitation. And you do so willingly of your own volition, under no magical compulsion or influence? I do. Then, Blackwood's lips curved into a cruel smile, the court accepts your substitution. Guards, release the prisoner Damien Cross. Transfer the chains to the vampire. What happened next would be debated and discussed in Waldenmere for generations to come. The guards approached Damien cautiously, producing keys to unlock his manacles. But as the first guard reached for the chains, Damien threw himself backward, putting his body between the guards and Serafina. No. I won't let you do this. I'd rather die 1,000 deaths than live without you. Two guards grabbed him, trying to pull him away, but Damien fought with desperate, manic strength. He kicked, he twisted, he screamed. Sarah, run. Forget the truce, forget the laws, just run. Please, please don't do this. Serafina walked forward then, moving past the 10-pace boundary. The crossbows tracked her, fingers tightened on triggers, but she ignored them all. She moved to where Damien struggled in the guard's grip and knelt before him, taking his face in her hands. Look at me, she commanded softly. Damien's wild eyes found hers. I have lived for 347 years, Serafina said. I have seen empires rise and crumble into dust. I have walked through countless wars and witnessed millions of deaths. I have loved before in my way and I have lost those I cared for. But in all those centuries, in all that time, I have never felt truly alive until I met you. Her thumbs gently wiped the tears from his bruised face. You gave me something I thought was lost forever, something I believed my kind could never possess. You gave me a soul. You made me feel human again, reminded me of who I was before the change, before the hunger, before the endless night. You taught me that love is not weakness but the greatest strength there is. And I cannot, let that love die with you on this platform. But you'll die instead, Damien sobbed. How is that better? How does that fix anything? Because you will live, Serafina smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible and heartbreaking all at once. You will live and you will remember. You will tell our story to anyone who will listen. You will be the bridge we always dreamed of, the proof that human and vampire can love each other truly. Your life will be the legacy of what we built together. That is worth my death. That is worth any price. She leaned forward and kissed him, a deep and tender kiss that held within it all the passion of 5 years together, all the dreams they had shared, all the future they would never have. When she pulled back, Damien was weeping uncontrollably. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I will love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond the ending of all things. Wait for me, my darling. When your time comes and you pass from this world, I will be waiting. I will find you even in whatever lies beyond. This is not goodbye forever. It is only goodbye for now. Then she stood and turned to the guards. Chain me. The guards looked to Blackwood, who nodded sharply. They produced chains of silver, metal that burned vampire flesh like acid, and approached Serafina cautiously. She extended her arms, allowing them to clamp the heavy manacles around her wrists. Where the silver touched her skin, it sizzled and smoked, filling the air with a sickening sweet smell like burning meat. Serafina didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, though her jaw clenched with the pain. They led her to the platform and secured her there with additional chains, wrapping her to the execution block in a web of silver that immobilized even her great wings. Each link that touched her left burning marks, and blood, dark vampire blood that was nearly black, began to seep from the wounds. Damien was released from his own chains, but he didn't run. He didn't try to escape. Instead, he stumbled toward the platform, reaching for Serafina, but the guards held him back. No closer, Blackwood commanded. The substitution is complete. The prisoner is free to go. Guards, escort him from the courtyard. Let me stay, Damien pleaded. If she's going to die, let me stay with her until the end. Please. I'm begging you. Blackwood considered this, then nodded curtly. Very well. But you will be held at a safe distance. Any attempt to interfere and you will be restrained. So Damien was held 20 paces from the platform, close enough to see Serafina clearly but too far to touch her. He sank to his knees in the dirt, his eyes never leaving her face. The crowd had grown completely silent. The spectacle they were witnessing had transformed from a simple execution into something far more profound and unsettling. Many were weeping openly now, commoners and nobles alike, moved despite themselves by the obvious depth of feeling between the condemned vampire and the freed man. Time passed. The moon crawled across the sky. The torches burned lower. And slowly, inexorably, the eastern horizon began to lighten. It started as barely perceptible, a slight lessening of the absolute darkness, a hint of deep blue creeping into the black. But it was enough. Serafina, chained to the platform, turned her head to the east and watched the approach of her death. "I'm not afraid," she said, and her voice carried across the silent courtyard. "I'm not afraid because I'm dying for love, and there is no better reason to die. I'm not afraid because I know that love doesn't end here. It never ends." The light grew stronger. The blue deepened, spreading across the horizon like an infection. The first stars began to fade. Damien was shaking, his whole body trembling with grief and horror. "Sarah," he called out. "Sarah, I love you. I'll never stop loving you. Never." "I know, my darling," she smiled at him, and her smile was serene, almost happy. "I know. And I will never stop loving you. Tell the world about us, Damien. Tell them that love conquered hate, even if only for a little while. Tell them that a human man and a vampire queen loved each other so much that they would each die for the other. Let that be our legacy. Let that be the seed from which peace might finally grow." The horizon was crimson now, the exact color of Serafina's eyes. The sun was coming, the day star, the destroyer of vampires, the light that would consume her utterly. Cardinal Matthias began to pray, his voice intoning ancient words of blessing and farewell. Some in the crowd joined him. Others simply watched, transfixed and moved beyond words. And then, just as the first direct rays of sunlight broke over the distant mountains, something extraordinary happened. Serafina began to sing. Her voice rose pure and clear, a song in a language that predated human civilization, a melody that spoke of love and loss, of sacrifice and hope, of endings that were also beginnings. It was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard, and it silenced even the cardinal's prayer. The sunlight struck the platform. Where it touched Serafina's exposed skin, she began to smoke and then to burn. But still she sang, her voice never wavering even as the flames began to consume her. The silver chains glowed red-hot, and the ancient wood of the platform began to catch fire. Damien screamed, a sound of pure anguish that tore from his throat. He tried to run to her, but the guards held him fast. "Sarah. No. God, please, no." But she sang on, even as the flames engulfed her body, even as her beautiful face began to char and blacken, even as her great wings caught fire and burned like tissue paper. She sang, and her eyes, those burning crimson eyes, never left Damien's face. The crowd watched in horror and awe as the vampire queen burned in the growing daylight. Many turned away, unable to bear the sight. But Damien watched, his face streaked with tears, forcing himself to witness every moment of her sacrifice. And then, something happened that no one could explain. As Serafina's body was consumed by the flames and the sunlight, as her song finally faded into silence, a strange light began to emanate from the pyre. It was not the orange red of normal fire, but a soft, silvery white light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The light grew brighter and brighter, until everyone in the courtyard had to shield their eyes. When the light faded and they could see again, the platform was empty. No body. No ash. No bones. Nothing remained but the silver chains, melted and fused into abstract sculptures by the intense heat. Serafina was gone, utterly and completely, as if she had never existed. A wind swept through the courtyard, warm despite the morning chill, and it carried with it the faintest scent of night-blooming flowers, jasmine and moonflower, the flowers that had decorated Serafina and Damien's wedding ceremony 5 years before. Damien collapsed, his legs finally giving out under him. He buried his face in his hands and wept with a grief so profound it seemed to echo off the very stones of the city. Lord Blackwood stood silent, staring at the empty platform. Cardinal Matthias made the sign of the cross, his face troubled. The nobles and common folk began to slowly disperse, speaking in hushed whispers about what they had witnessed. And in the days and weeks that followed, something strange began to happen in Waldenmere. People began to talk about what they had seen, not just the execution but the love displayed there. They talked about how the vampire queen had chosen to die so that her human husband could live. They talked about Damien's grief, about the sacrifice, about the song that had echoed across the courtyard even as flames consumed its singer. The story spread from Waldenmere to the surrounding territories, and everywhere it went, it planted seeds of doubt in the hearts of those who heard it. Could vampires truly love? Could the undead possess souls? Was the war between the species truly necessary, or were there other possibilities? Damien himself became something of a legend. He did exactly what Serafina had asked of him. He told their story to anyone who would listen. He traveled from city to city, speaking in town squares and noble courts, in churches and taverns, anywhere people would gather. He spoke of the 5 years he had spent with Serafina, of the love they had shared, of the future they had dreamed of building together. Not everyone believed him. Many called him a madman, a heretic, a man corrupted by dark magic. But others listened, truly listened, and began to question the certainties they had always held. Small changes began to occur. A border town created a truce zone where humans and vampires could meet without violence to trade goods and information. A group of scholars from the university began studying vampire culture with genuine curiosity rather than mere strategic intelligence. A few brave souls, both human and vampire, began to form tentative friendships across the species divide. It was slow. It was difficult. There were setbacks and tragedies. But change, once begun, is difficult to stop entirely. Damien lived for 40 more years after Serafina's death. He never remarried, never took another lover. He wore a pendant around his neck that contained a lock of her silver-black hair, the only physical remnant he had of her, and he touched it often, especially when speaking about her to new audiences. As he grew older, his hair turning gray and then white, his face creasing with age, people noticed something strange. He never seemed bitter. Despite losing the love of his life, despite witnessing her burn in the sun, despite spending decades alone when he could have been with her for eternity, Damien Cross was not a broken man. He was filled with purpose, with determination, with an unshakable belief that the sacrifice made in that courtyard would ultimately mean something. On his deathbed, surrounded by friends both human and vampire, for by then such friendships were no longer unthinkable, Damien smiled and spoke his final words. "I kept my promise, Sarah. I told them our story. I made it mean something. Now I'm coming to find you wherever you are. Wait for me, my love. Wait for me." He died with that smile on his face, and those who were present swore that the room filled with the scent of jasmine and moonflower. The candles flickered though there was no wind, and for just a moment, some claimed to see a figure standing at the foot of the bed, a beautiful woman with pale skin and silver-black hair, her arms extended in welcome. But that might have been simply the grief-stricken imagination of those who mourned him. Damien Cross was buried in the Waldenmere Cemetery, despite the protests of some who felt he deserved no place in consecrated ground. The headstone was simple. Damien Alexander Cross. Beloved husband. He loved beyond fear. He lived without regret. And on certain nights, nights when the moon is full and red, nights when the boundary between worlds grows thin, people passing the cemetery swear they can hear singing. A duet, two voices raised in harmony. One the voice of a man, warm and human and filled with joy, the other the voice of a woman, ancient and powerful and brimming with love. They say the song speaks of love that transcends death, of souls that find each other across any distance, of promises kept even beyond the ending of all things. They say it is the most beautiful sound they have ever heard. And in the generations after Damien's death, the world slowly, painfully began to change. The war between humans and vampires didn't end overnight. Wars never do. But it cooled, evolving from extermination to coexistence, from fear to wary respect, from absolute enmity to complex relationship. There are schools now where human and vampire children learn together. There are treaties and trade agreements. There are mixed communities where both species live side by side, not always easily, not without tension, but with the shared understanding that the alternative, endless war, serves no one. And in every one of these places, in every treaty negotiation and peace council and integration meeting, someone inevitably tells the story of Damien Cross and Serafina Nocturne. They tell it to remind themselves why they're trying, why the effort is worthwhile, why they must persist even when it seems impossible. They tell the story of how a human man loved a vampire queen so much that he would have died for her, and of how a vampire queen loved a human man so much that she did die for him. They tell how that love, displayed in a moment of ultimate sacrifice, planted seeds that would eventually grow into forests. It is a story of hope, of love stronger than hate, of light found in darkness, of life affirmed even in death. It is the story of the Crimson Vow, the promise made between two souls that not even the sun itself could break. And it is a story that will be told for as long as there are beings capable of love, capable of sacrifice, capable of believing that a better world is possible if we're only brave enough to reach for it. In the end, that is what Serafina and Damien gave to the world. Not peace itself, but the hope of peace. Not instant understanding, but the possibility of understanding. Not the end of all conflict, but the proof that conflict doesn't have to be eternal. They gave the world an example of love so pure and strong that it could not be ignored or dismissed, no matter how much some might have wanted to. They gave their lives to prove a simple truth that too often is forgotten, that we are all human and vampire and every being in between capable of extraordinary love, and that this love, if we are brave enough to embrace it, can change the world. The execution courtyard in Waldenmere still stands. The platform where Serafina burned has been rebuilt several times over the centuries, but each time the builders report strange occurrences. Tools that move on their own, cold spots on even the warmest days, the faint scent of flowers where none grow. Some say the place is haunted. Others say it is blessed. Perhaps it is both. What is certain is that it has become a place of pilgrimage for those who believe in the possibility of love transcending boundaries. People come from across the world, human, vampire, and other species besides, to stand in that courtyard and remember what happened there. They leave flowers. They leave letters addressed to the lovers who changed the world. They leave pieces of their own hearts, hoping that some of the courage and love displayed in that place might rub off on them. And on nights when the moon is full and red, when the veil between worlds grows thin, some visitors report seeing them. A man and a woman standing together at the center of the courtyard where once a platform stood. The man is dark-haired and handsome, dressed in simple clothes, his eyes full of warmth and intelligence. The woman is pale and beautiful beyond measure, with silver-black hair and great wings of shadow, her eyes glowing with crimson light. They stand with arms around each other, foreheads touching, whispering words that only they can hear. And they are smiling, both of them, with the joy of souls who have found their way back to each other despite all the darkness and death that tried to keep them apart. Some say these are ghosts. Others say they are merely legends given form by wishful thinking and moonlight. But those who have seen them, truly seen them, know better. They are real as love itself. As real as sacrifice and hope and the unshakable belief that we can be better than our worst impulses. They are Damien and Serafina, united once more, together in death as they could never truly be in life. They are the proof that love does not end, that it transcends flesh and blood and breath and time itself. They are the Crimson Vow, eternal and unbroken. And they are waiting patiently for the world to finally become what they always knew it could be. A place where love is not bounded by species or circumstance, where sacrifice is honored rather than wasted, where the courage to love despite danger is seen as strength rather than foolishness. That day has not yet come. Perhaps it never will, not fully. But every day in small ways the world inches closer to that dream. And every day in that courtyard in Waldenmere, as the sun sets and the moon rises, two souls stand together in defiance of death itself, reminding all who can see them that love, True love, selfless love, love willing to sacrifice everything, is the most powerful force in any world. This is the story of Damien Cross and Serafina Nocturne. This is the story of the Crimson Vow. This is the story of how love, displayed in one perfect moment of sacrifice, began to change the world. And it is a story that will never end because true love never does.